Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. You know that gut-wrenching feeling when everything falls apart? When your carefully laid plans crumble like a house of cards? Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of failure, but not in the way you might expect. We're exploring how setbacks can actually propel us forward, and why some of what we think we know about bouncing back might be completely wrong.
And you know what's really interesting about this topic? Recent research is actually challenging a lot of our assumptions about failure and resilience.
Oh, really? What kind of assumptions are we talking about?
Well, according to a fascinating study just published by the American Psychological Association, we tend to vastly overestimate how well people bounce back from failure. We have this sort of optimistic belief that failure automatically leads to growth and learning.
Wait, but isn't that what we're always told? You know, the whole fail forward thing?
That's exactly what makes this so interesting. The research shows that this overly optimistic view might actually be harmful. When we assume people will naturally bounce back from failure, we become less likely to offer help and support to those who are struggling.
I've never thought about it that way. So what should we be doing instead?
Well, Harvard Health recently published some really practical strategies for dealing with setbacks. They recommend something called cognitive restructuring. It's basically a 4-step process for changing how we think about failure.
4 steps? Can you break that down for us?
Sure. First, you need to consciously stop when negative thoughts take over. Then breathe to reduce tension. Third, reflect by questioning your thoughts. Ask yourself if they're really true. And finally, choose how to deal with the situation constructively.
That actually sounds pretty doable.
You know what's really fascinating about failure? Our brains actually process rejection similarly to physical pain.
Wait, what? You mean failing literally hurts?
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to develop proper coping strategies. It's not just about positive thinking, it's about building real psychological resilience.
Speaking of the tech world, they seem to have a completely different take on failure, right?
Absolutely. The startup world has this mantra of fail fast and fail often. And interestingly, a 2019 Nature study found that scientists and entrepreneurs who ultimately succeeded had actually failed more frequently than their less successful peers.
But doesn't that contradict what we were saying earlier about people not naturally bouncing back from failure?
That's a great point. The key difference is in the support systems and mindset. It's not about failing alone, it's about failing in an environment where you have the tools and support to learn and grow.
So what are some practical ways people can build that kind of environment for themselves?
One effective approach is what psychologists call cognitive reframing. Instead of seeing failure as a dead end, you learn to view it as feedback. For example, instead of thinking, I'm a failure, you might think, I'm learning what doesn't work.
That makes sense. But isn't it hard to do that in the moment when you're feeling really down?
Absolutely, and that's why it's important to practice these skills before you need them. Research shows that building resilience is like building a muscle. It needs regular exercise.
Can you give us some specific exercises people can try?
One really effective technique is the 2-column exercise. You write down your negative thoughts in one column and then write counter-arguments in the other. It helps you get some distance from your inner critic.
That sounds like a really practical tool.
And you know what's interesting? Research shows that people who engage with failure in this structured way often develop higher emotional intelligence over time.
Higher emotional intelligence? How does that work?
Well, when you practice examining your thoughts and reactions to failure, you become better at understanding both your own emotions and those of others. It's like developing a more sophisticated emotional vocabulary.
That's fascinating. It's like failure can actually make us more empathetic?
Exactly. But here's the catch. It only works if we're willing to be vulnerable and honest about our struggles, rather than pretending everything's fine.
That's a really important point about vulnerability.
And you know what? This ties back to our earlier point about overestimating resilience. When we pretend failure is easy to overcome, we make it harder for people to be vulnerable about their struggles.
So what's the takeaway here? How do we strike the right balance?
The key is to approach failure with what I call realistic optimism. Acknowledge that setbacks are genuinely difficult, but also believe in your ability to learn and grow from them with the right support and tools.
That really brings everything together, the research, the practical tools, and the importance of support.
Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to never fail, it's to fail better, learn meaningfully, and support each other through the process.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Copilot Podcasts. Remember, the next time you face a setback, you're not alone, and with the right approach, that failure might just be the beginning of something better.
And hey, if you mess up trying these techniques, well, that's just another opportunity to practice, right?